Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Mari Koeck. I'm Director of Engagement and Impact with the United States Study Center. And just before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. The University of Sydney is located on land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. So this year has been quite a year. I think everyone would agree in saying President Trump was sworn in on the 20th of January. And in many ways, it feels like it's been less than a year, but it feels like more than a year. I was reflecting on some of the like, the beats that have happened throughout the year, and each one feels like it could have been maybe, I don't know, a separate season of The West Wing or something. We had Liberation Day, or we had Signalgate, or we had the longest shutdown in government history. We had unprecedented, measures taken by ICE and sending the National Guard to cities. We've seen a lot of developments on Gaza and Ukraine. We're just kind of like moving at such a fast pace through all these things. Trump 2.0 has clearly been very different to Trump 1.0. And so I'm excited to talk through those things tonight. And in addition to having a great panel discussion, we also have copies available of our latest polling from the United States Study Center. So it's our Allies and Partners poll. And the title for this year is Where the Quad Countries Stand on Trump, Security, and the Future of the Indo-Pacific. The exciting thing about this year is for the past few years, we've been polling America and Australia and Japan, but we've added in India this year for the first time. So it's the first time that we can have polling and get a sense of public opinion from all four Quad countries on some of these issues: attitudes towards Trump, attitudes towards the Quad, attitudes towards tariffs. So we'll be sprinkling in some of the findings that we found from how these four publics feel about some of these issues in the discussion tonight. But now, just to get into things, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. So starting on the end there, we have Dr. Robison, and she is a lecturer in American Studies at the United States Study Center. And then next to her, we have Chaz Licciardello, who you might know as one of the co-hosts of ABC's Planet America and also his popular PEP podcast. And then we have Jared Mondschein, who is Director of Research at the United States Study Center. So thank you so much for joining me today to dig into these really challenging issues and to really think back and reflect on this year and all that's happened. So to kick things off, I'm actually going to steal something that Chaz does at the start of his podcast episodes. I think I'm in the mindset for this a little bit because, three of the four of us on the panel are dual nationals. We're Americans and Australians. We love Thanksgiving. So we've just had the American holiday of Thanksgiving. I just celebrated last weekend, so it's, first in my mind. And so one of the things I like to do when I think back on a year is, think back, what is something you're thankful for? And Chaz always starts his podcast. He and his guest, or usually it's Dr. David Smith, who couldn't be with us tonight, unfortunately. But they share what's one thing from the past week that they're thankful for. I'm going to ask everyone on the panel, please share what is one thing from this past year, 2025, that you're thankful for? I might start with Jared and then go down the line.
Well, in addition to being thankful for becoming an Australian citizen last month, and happy to report that I was not deported beforehand. That was and yeah. So in addition to that, I guess I'm thankful. I know this is cliche and maybe Pollyannish to say, but I really am thankful for allies and partners. I think. You can look around the world and see that maybe America first is not America alone, but in many instances, the U.S. has undoubtedly pulled back in a number of areas. I think the most tangible example of that, in my view, would probably be Ukraine. And if it weren't for NATO allies and partners in Europe really supporting the Ukrainians, I think we'd see a very different situation there. And I think not only does that show the importance of allies and partners, but also the agency of allies and partners and how we should not, I think, amongst allies and partners, be waiting for the U.S. to do things, but to actually, grabbing the wheel and saying, you know what, I'd like to go in this direction. And I think the direction of NATO support for Ukraine is probably in America's long-term interest, but perhaps not what this administration wants to prioritize right now.
All right, thank you. How about you, Chaz?
I'm sorry, I always do this. Since you cite the podcast, you'll know that I never have only one thing I'm grateful for. Can I just say two things?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I'm just a very grateful guy. Okay, but so the two things I have in mind is, number one, I'm grateful that the Senate, the US Senate, hasn't given up its reins quite yet. As much as it seems like it has at times, people certainly talk about the US Senate like it's given up the reins and it just lets Trump do whatever he likes. That's actually not true. There have been 57 nominations withdrawn this year by Donald Trump, which is more than twice the record of any other first year in history. If you look at Trump's first term in the first year, only 22 were withdrawn. The reason why 57 were withdrawn was because the Senate told Donald Trump, I'm sorry, these guys are crap. We're not going to vote for them. And so he withdrew them. Didn't get much publicity because it wasn't in the Republicans' interest to publicize they were staying up to Trump. And it wasn't in the Democrats' interest to publicize that the Republicans are staying up to Trump. But they were. And it's one of the untold stories of this year that the Senate has been staying up to Trump. Maybe not as much as you'd like them to, but they haven't given up the ghost quite yet. And I'm grateful for that. The second thing I'm grateful for is the fact that there's a phrase I always say, which I'm quite fond of, that things keep on going as they are until they don't. You never really know when things have changed for the good until after, when you look back and go, oh, that's where the change was. But until then, they just keep on being the same. And I think a lot of people, and I was one of them, was concerned at the end of last year and the beginning of this year that things may have actually changed in America, that we had an actual disjunction where we had an election where people were, one of the issues on the ballot was, do we care about democracy? And a lot of people seem to not care. And then early on this year, we had some genuine underminings of the democratic process and the rule of law and things like that happen, and no one seemed to care. The polling was basically identical to what it had been before. And you go, well, no one cares about this at all. Have things changed? Has America given up on democracy? Are we at the beginning of a new authoritarian period where things are very, very, very different and the rules have changed? And the answer is no, we're not. Because as the year progressed and we saw the economy wasn't doing very well, guess what happened to the polling? It went through the floor. And what we learned is that some things haven't changed at all, which is Americans, they don't care about civics lessons. They care about the economy. They care about inflation, and they care about unemployment, and they care about all the same things they cared about 30 years ago and 50 years ago and 80 years ago. And maybe you wish they cared about other things, but I'm sorry, they don't. But the good thing is they still only care about the same things that they only cared about 30 years ago. And I find that comforting because it means things haven't changed. As much as you think they've changed, we're still in that position where they just keep on going on until they don't. And we haven't reached until they don't. Thank God. I am grateful for that.
Excellent. And how about you, Kat?
Well, first I'll echo Jared and say I also became an Australian citizen in August of this year. I am really thankful for that. But I'm also really thankful for my everyday fellow Americans who've been willing to step up and talk about what's happening. So especially when we talk about National Guard deployments or sort of the stepping up of ICE enforcement, particularly within the last month and so, when you've really seen people being taken at their green card or pulled out of line at citizenship ceremonies, that everyday Americans who have maybe never engaged in a political process before are starting to engage in politics, whether that's recording what's happening so that there's a record of that. So I'm really grateful for that. And also for principled people within service to government, whether they're elected or they're in government, who are willing to stand up to their principles, whether that's resigning because they've been asked to do something that is outside of their job description or may not follow the law, whether they're willing to stand up and perhaps even say, speak back to Trump. We've seen Representative Thomas Macy in Kentucky, who's been really willing to sort of take his own line. And, whether or not you agree with all of his principles, he is one of those lawmakers who, to his own detriment possibly, has stood up and said, this is my line. This is what I care about. Mark Kelly, you've seen that, really outspoken about, I am allowed to speak about what the role of the military is and where a military officer should look for guidance on what's legal and what's not, and that we are elected or appointed to serve the Constitution. We take an oath to the Constitution. So I'm really grateful for my everyday Americans who see something that concerns them and they feel empowered to step up and help out to each other. We've seen them step up in terms of fellow neighbors when the government shut down and SNAP benefits weren't being delivered. You saw people really rally to their communities and make sure that people weren't going to be doing it rough. So really happy for that and really thankful for people within government, both elected and appointed, and just everyday civil servants who are willing to stand up and sort of do what's principled.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. Trump 2.0 has been markedly different to Trump 1.0 in a lot of ways. And even though he had, a full term as president before, he has done so many unprecedented things that we've never seen before in US history. So I guess I'm keen to go back, get an answer from everyone on the panel. I'll go in reverse order this time. What, of all these unprecedented things, what surprised you the most from this past year? So I'll start with you, Kat.
I want to say two things. One, very recently that I was really surprised is just Trump calling affordability a scam. I think that was just not great messaging in a time when Americans are really concerned about everyday costs. But I was also surprised at the sort of machete-like willingness of the DOGE cuts that happened in the beginning of the term, and how willing sort of the GOP was to go along with programs that would significantly hurt US soft power. A lot of these were sort of on wish lists of things that could be done, but I was really surprised to the extent at which the government was willing to hand the reins over to Elon Musk to sort of let his tech bros go after that. So that was a bit surprising. Not surprised by Elon Musk's behavior. My background is in space policy. I could have told you he would love to do this from 10, 15 years ago when no one was talking about Elon Musk. So his behavior didn't surprise me, but the fact that the GOP was willing to go along with that and accept that weakening of US soft power.
How about you, Chaz?
I'd say the thing that's most surprised me, it's a minor thing, but I just can't get it out of my head. I still don't understand how this has happened. But there's a person who, probably to your benefit, most of you hopefully have not heard of, called Laura Loomer. If you have heard of her, I'm sorry. She's one of the most unhinged people on Twitter. And the thing that surprised me, she has been unhinged for a very long time. But what surprised me this year more than anything is the way she's turned into some kind of kingmaker in the Republican Party. She's not even, I don't think she's even a Republican. She's certainly not a conservative by any definition of the word. Until a year and a half ago, Trump hadn't even heard of her. She was always just messing around on the cultural right, and he had nothing to do with her. She came up to him at one point in time during the election campaign last year and sucked up to him a little bit, and he adopted her as a little bit of a mascot to just tag around with him. But then the people around him said, "She's bad news, mate. Get rid of her." And so he did. He just got rid of her because he didn't care. But somewhere along the way, somehow this year, she started tweeting out about staffers, about bureaucrats, about cabinet officials, saying, "I don't like this person because of usually something that she's made up." And they get fired. This has not just happened once. This has happened maybe 10 times now. This happened a lot. And every time she does it, she successfully gets fired. She starts boasting about how she's loomered someone online. And I would have thought that would annoy Trump. If I was Trump and someone's doing little sort of yard dances about how they're controlling him, I would have thought that would really annoy him. But he just keeps letting her do it. And I don't know why he and his administration are paying attention to her. She doesn't control any large group of supporters. She's just a nobody who's really extreme and weird. And I don't think she's helping his administration in any way, shape, or form. So why she suddenly emerged as the as the lead recruiter of the Trump administration? I don't know, but she has, and that surprised me a lot.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of shifting dynamics in these like key relationships. Trump and Musk, that changed throughout the year. Laura Loomer's rise in prominence, or we saw the shift with Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, it's been an interesting dynamic to watch those relationships across the year. How about you, Jared? What surprised you most?
I was gonna say maybe Olivia Newsy and her relationship with RFK,
Was that this year?
or maybe her relationship with Mark Sanford. Surprising. That's a deep cut. But no, I think Doge and Laura Loomer were both excellent, and yeah, I don't think many people saw those coming in terms of just how impactful those would be. A lot of people saw Elon Musk and say, "Oh yeah, he'll be around," but and we all knew he'd burn out, but we just didn't see. No, I don't think anyone predicted he'd be as I don't want to say effective, but just as just the impactful, I guess is the word, as he was. And then, yeah, Laura Loomer similarly. I don't think she's a recruiter. I think she's more of an enforcer.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who she's recruited.
That's true. She's more dismissive than a recruiter.
I guess then the only thing remaining would maybe be tariffs and just how high those tariffs are. He did say when he was campaigning, he put out some numbers of tariffs. And I did think they approached those numbers, but the lasting nature of a lot of them and the way that so many countries have been willing to engage on these tariffs, despite the fact that we're going to find out soon just how legal these tariffs are at the Supreme Court. I did not see those tariff rates staying at this far into the administration. I thought it was really like a bargaining chip maybe, and there'd be a negotiation, and there was, but even with negotiations, he's still leaving all the tariffs on, and except for let's see, Iran and Russia, everyone gets 10% or more, right? So that I didn't predict that. I did not predict that Australia would get a 10% tariff. With that said, I should clarify, I don't think the Australian bureaucrats have already calculated this and found that actually the tariff war or or Liberation Day favors Australia through trade diversion. So it's not great for the bilateral. I think it puts political pressure on Albanese to give the middle finger to Trump. But at the same time, I think there are way bigger fish to fry than just bilateral tariff on goods.
So picking up on that point, I mean, one of the things that the polling gets into is these attitudes of these allies and partners towards issues like tariffs. And unsurprisingly, we saw that a majority of Australians, Japanese respondents, Indian respondents, all thought that that Trump was bad for the relationship with their country. So a majority in all those cases. I'd say what surprised me most in the polling was that a plurality, so not quite a majority, but pretty, 40s and higher for those three countries, viewed the relationship with the United States as more important than ever. Like a larger number of respondents in those countries said the relationship with the United States is more important than ever. Yet they thought, that Trump was bad for their country. Why do you think that is? What did you kind of find as you were going through the polling, Jared?
Xi Jinping, he's the gift that keeps on giving for Americans. So firstly, before we get into that, I should just once again highlight this, and not only the fact that this is just been released, but also that my name is last because I did the least amount of work on this. So Dan Garrett and Ava Kalinauskas in the audience today, they both did the lion's share on this round politics. And they you can hear their far more insightful takes on this than me in a podcast coming out tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah, midnight tonight.
Midnight tonight. There we go. So in terms of the way that allies and partners have been receiving this, we've been, as Mark said, we've been doing this for a few years. And 2 years ago, we asked if Donald Trump is reelected, should Australia withdraw from the U.S. alliance? And 37% of Australians said, yeah, you should withdraw if Trump is reelected. Then we asked it again. Donald Trump is now president. Should Australia withdraw from the alliance? And it's now 17%. With that said, there's a similar number of Australians who think that Donald Trump has been good for Australia. That's 16%, right? So 16% think Trump has been good, but 17% want to withdraw from the alliance altogether. What does that tell you? To me, that tells me that Australians can walk and chew gum. They can see that Yeah, no one's a big fan of Australia here, less than 20%, which is, I think, probably a historical low for all US presidents, including George W. Bush.
You mean Trump?
Trump
Sorry, what did I say?
said, fan of
Australia.
Australia.
Yes, thank you.
I think we've got a lot of fans of Australia here.
May revoke a citizenship within a month. But no, so they're not a fan of Trump. But at the same time, the question I always ask is, what's the alternative? What's the tangible alternative to America right now? And our boss likes to tell the story of a NATO gathering in Europe in the 1980s at the beginning of the Reagan administration. And they were all sitting around complaining about the obnoxious Americans and how self-absorbed they are and how selfish and how just they're cowboys and they're so annoying. And the UK ambassador famously said, yep, everything you say about the Americans is true, but they're the only Americans we have. What's the alternative, right? And it just like, is Xi Jinping the alternative? I mean, there's a reason why in our polls that we've been doing now for many years, the difference between the US, Australia, and Japan and other allies and partners in terms of their views of China, the difference has gone from here to here. It's within about 5 points, right? They all see China as a problem. They all see the approach to China as working together with allies and partners, even when some of our allies and partners are led by politicians whom we don't love.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that has the biggest impact in this region, I mean, a lot of the policies do, but one of the most drastic changes we've seen this year was the cut in, USAID funding. It was almost like, it was very gutted, and the few programs that remained got, passed off to different, Department of State, other areas. And so USAID no longer exists. It closed its doors. And that was thanks to Doge. And so you guys have talked a little bit about Doge already, but I guess, Chaz and Kat, I'm keen to hear from you guys. Do you think that these Doge changes that we've seen, shuttering USAID and, massive cuts across other parts of government, do you think those changes are going to last and become the new, or are we going to revert to what an old status quo was? Where do you think it's going to land?
Sure. So I think that it's really, I don't think we're going to stay at the level of no aid. That's probably untenable in terms of foreign aid is an enormous source of U.S. soft power, and people in government know that, even if Doge and Trump do not. The goodwill and the importance that U.S. aid and those programs do are very important. Will it be able to be restored to the amount that it was before? Unlikely. If a Democrat comes into the White House in 2028, if the Democrats sweep the midterms and take both the House and the Senate, which would be very difficult for them to do, even with sort of the tides of the election now, where Democrats are performing quite well in special elections, it would be very difficult for them to take control of both houses, and then they still have to contend with Trump. So to restore the amount of aid to the levels it was pre-Doge is probably not going to happen anytime soon. There will be some restoration of aid. I expect that the Democrats will probably get control of at least one of the houses, one of the bodies within Congress, and they will use it as a negotiation to restore funding to things that they see as a priority. I also think as China takes advantage of the funding lapse, right, and sort of goes in and lawmakers and policymakers within the U.S. sort of see the impacts of sort of ceding that goodwill to China, then you will see some restoration of aid. During the Trump administration, that might come through bargaining, right? Trump likes to make a deal. Some of these nations who really benefited might go to Trump and make a deal. Like, we'll provide you with a place for forward basing. We'll provide you with cheap exports. We'll provide you with this in exchange for restoring some of that funding. So I do think we're going to see a gradual restoration of some of that. But I do think that sort of the cuts to U.S. foreign aid are something that Republicans have been after for some time. So I don't think anytime in the near future we're going to see a restoration to it at the level it was prior to Doge.
I've got a lot of faith in government to grow. Not necessarily in the short term, but over time. I mean, I'm sure it won't be happening in a hurry, but I think, especially given that as as Dr. Katz said, it's in America's interests.
Yeah.
Like they weren't doing it out of charity. They were doing it out of self-interest. And so over time, I've got every confidence that that will grow back eventually. I think when we're talking about Doge, look, in terms of the people who are most affected, obviously the people who are dying, who are supported but with funding, yeah, it's going to affect them a lot. They'll be dead. But leaving aside the immediate victims of US aid cuts, I think the biggest legacy of Doge is the question of the relationship between the president and the bureaucracy, who you can sack and on what grounds. And are we about to return to a spoil system, which is what the independent bureaucracy was supposedly ended 150 years ago. And I would say that, we saw the first sustained attack on the independent, non-political bureaucracy under Doge. I would say the answer to that question is going to be decided by the Supreme Court. And right now, in fact.
Yes.
And,
Well, I don't know if they'll decide it right now, but the hearing,
yeah,
though.
that's right.
It's important about Doge cuts is there's been a real loss of bureaucratic civil servant knowledge. So there was already an issue with sort of declining workforces, especially in terms of middle management and that sort of middle age of workers who are the mid-career level. There was already an issue across many agencies with sort of knowledge retention and being able to pass that knowledge on. My expertise, of course, again, is in space. So I know that these cuts have hit very hard at NASA. They were already facing a really difficult sort of cliff when they lost their sort of the boomers that are on the edge of retirement, facing a real knowledge cliff. That has now been compounded across a lot of agencies across the federal bureaucracy because of the Doge cuts and how many people took either voluntary buyouts or were victims of the cut. So I don't think that we've even realized the extent of harm at the level of bureaucracy for Doge yet.
I agree with that. I just going to add one more thing to the question you asked from Jared before about just saying which I think is important to acknowledge is that I think part of it. I'm sure what Jared said is about Xi Jinping, the gift that keeps on giving, is true. But when you ask yourself, okay, what's the difference between Xi Jinping now and Xi Jinping 2 years ago? And I would say what's going on there is, my guess is, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And we're watching America go. And all of a sudden you don't seem so tough anymore when you go, oh, you get rid of America, who cares about America? Well, America's gone. All of a sudden it doesn't seem so fun anymore. And I think people are getting a sense of that, what a post-American world might be like. And it's scary if you care about democracy and you care about things like that. And so I think that is something. That's one area. Let's give him credit where Trump is right. Trump has always said the rest of the world takes America for granted, and he's 100% right. And I wish he didn't demonstrate that by removing America. But that is what's going on. I think he's proving his point. Sadly,
he's still he keeps America still the center of global attention. One of the most remarkable moments of that this year, which we've touched on a little bit already, but was Liberation Day. It was the 2nd of April, and he said he wanted to do it on the 1st of April, but he didn't. He was advised not to because people think it was an April Fool's joke, and this is no joke. And I heard this interesting interview with Jameson Greer recently, and he's the U.S. trade representative. So he's kind of the tariff czar for the Trump administration. And he was saying, people talked about Liberation Day, but I want to talk more about, I think August 1st was the day. And that's when the administration came out with more clarification around the tariffs and what they were really going to be in the long term, because negotiations and conversations ensued after Liberation Day. But, they went out there with their posters and showed what the tariffs were on, dozens of countries. And, even the herd of McDonald Islands were not excluded from these tariffs. And it's so interesting to see, what that has done in terms of how different countries have responded. Canada has been trying to really stand up to that and push back on that. You see, the European Commission trying to secure deals and work with, Trump as the deal maker in chief and things like that. But, what do you think? How are these tariffs being received by different countries around the world? And what do you think the long-term impact is going to be? I don't know, Jared?
Oh, well. Yeah, no, it's not great. But I think, you know, I have to just point out one thing. You talked about Jameson Greer being the tariff czar, and I just don't think he is. I think it's just Trump through and through. I don't think there's a lot of continuity in Trump. You look, he used to be a Democrat, and now he's a Republican. He used to even donate to Democrats. He donated to Kamala Harris back in the day when she was running for Senate in California. On policies, all sorts of policies he couldn't care less about. You know, remember after a mass shooting, he said we should grab the guns. And the Republicans very quickly were like, no, we do not want to grab the guns. He's indifferent to so many policies. And the one, even his personal life, I mean, we're on life number 3, but like we know enough about his personal life that there's not a lot of continuity there either. I think it really is tariffs and tariffs alone where he does not shift. Doesn't matter what anyone says. And so it's one of the reasons why I ahead of the bilateral between Albanese and Trump, I said I don't see the point of even trying to negotiate on tariffs because he just is so rigid and so fixed on that. It's just of all the things to actually try to change, he's not going to change on that, right? Everything else he's sort of indifferent to. Look at the way that he shifted on Ukraine, right? Like right now he's taking Putin talking points in many ways. 6 months ago, he was taking Zelensky talking points. It's like he doesn't really have a lot of opinion on it, a strong opinion, or what's the phrase? Strong opinions weakly held. Yeah. I think on tariffs, it is his and his alone. And even in the way that the tariffs were announced, I believe it was 4 o'clock on April 2nd. And do you know when he actually decided on those tariff rates? 1 p.m. There's no interagency process here. There's no talking with allies and partners. If he actually did want to affect an agenda of isolating China, you would do it with allies and partners, not just slap huge tariffs on them. So on the whole, it hasn't been received well. There is no real strategic reason for why you would put massive tariffs on India, why you would, that goes against every administration of the last 30 years approach to India.
Why do you think they did that?
There are a number of reasons. Most recently, the reason why Trump has put higher tariffs than usual on India is because literally this is the number one reason. Modi refused to endorse Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. I wish it was more interesting. Like again, I've said this before, but like there's some U.S. presidents who are fascinating. Like if you read about Nixon, if you listen to the tapes, he was like Shakespearean in the way that he was so clever and he was exceptionally talented and on foreign policy and in many ways shifting the U.S. economy. It's really fascinating. He was also very neurotic. It's very Shakespearean. Trump is not. And it is just the number one accolade missing from his biography is Nobel Peace Prize winner. But at least now he can say he's a FIFA Peace Prize winner.
I'm just going to say, I think the answer to your question about what they're going to do about it is who cares? Like in that, and what I mean by that is it takes more than 3 years to negotiate a serious trade deal that's going to cut America out. I mean, you can do little short-term things on the side, but the fact is everyone knows that what Jared said is correct. This is Trump's little thing. This is not a Republican thing. This is not something that J.D. Vance is going to continue if he becomes president after Trump. This is not something that MAGA is going to continue after Trump. This is just Trump. Trump alone. And every single person with any intelligence involved in foreign affairs realizes that the time it will take to work around Trump is longer than the time that these tariffs will be maintained. Like it just is going to take too long. So I think everyone is just going to sit there and just wait them out. Like like at most you got 3 years, hopefully. And it's so yeah. And I think that I mean, sure. Like if you look at China, for instance, they diversified during the first term of Trump, and I'm sure there'll be diversification happening on a gradual level. But I just don't see some worldwide anti-American alliance forming with sort of like with all these new trade deals. It's just there isn't the time. It took 7 years to get the Asia Pacific deal together. The Trans-Pacific, yeah, like it took like 7 years. It took forever that 3 years is not long enough.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I just think at the end of the day, people are just going to wait him out.
Can I just add one more thing? Sorry, before you weigh in. There's one thing we talk about a lot, the USA Center, is the difference between structure and agency, and how the president has a lot of agency to do things, but there's a lot of structural limitations. One structural limitation to these tariffs is that it is not politically popular to get rid of tariffs under conventional presidencies. What did Biden do with all of Trump's tariffs from the first term? He kept all of them, and he actually added more on Chinese electric vehicles, right? So yes, I don't think anyone expects another president to be as aggressive with tariffs, and our own polling says as much. We asked the U.S., Australian, Indian, and Japanese publics if they thought a future president would be as aggressive with tariffs, and I think around 2/3 said, yeah, we can't see anyone else being like this. I think just the structural or the political limitations of exposing American manufacturing to foreign competition, that might be a limiting factor, but I can't see a future president doing more than what Trump has done, if that makes sense.
Sorry, I know we're cutting you out. That's all right. I just one more very quick thing. I was just going to say, this is something actually I've had arguments with my various co-hosts about, in that pretty much all of them exclusively have much less confidence than I do that the tariffs are going to go after Trump. For exactly the reasons you just said. Like they say, well, look at Biden. Like maybe the tariffs won't go. I'm sure tariffs are going to go. And I'll tell you why I'm sure tariffs are going to go. Because I think you just got to think about, it's very easy to try and imagine politics now as what politics is going to be in 3 years or 4 years, whatever. But I always like to think, okay, where is this going? And I'm sure that the politics of 4 years' time is going to be about the deficit. I'm sure of it. Because Social Security is about to go bankrupt. And right now, we're not talking about it, but we will be talking about it in 2028. I promise you. That's all anyone's going to talk about in 2028 and 2029. It's going to be constant Social Security and Medicare talk. And the debt and the deficit is going to become in vogue very, very rapidly. And what that means is no one's going to be able to promise anything in terms of economic stuff, because people are going to go, how are you going to pay for it? And in the past, they would have gone, oh, who cares? But in 4 years, they will not get away with that. So we have something which everyone now acknowledges, an affordability issue in America, an inflation issue in America, and people are going to try and run to combat that for sure in the future. And you go, okay, so what are you going to do about it? The easiest thing in the world for them to do something about is just get rid of the tariffs. And go, there you go, 15% less prices on everything. It's the easiest thing for a Democrat to do. So my prediction is, even though in the past the Democrats have been quite pro-tariff, I bet you the next generation of Democrats are free traders. And that is the reason why. Just because the only thing they'll be able to do to address inflation. That's just my guess, but let's see.
We've seen some interesting reversals this year of, like, Democrats who maybe would have stood on one side before and then jumping onto the Epstein files as, oh yeah, this is our issue and we need to release the Epstein files. So I wouldn't be surprised if it does play out like that. This year, you've mentioned this a little bit already about, we know that President Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes.
And we know also that one of the easiest ways to get on his good side is to write a letter, to the Nobel Peace Prize committee to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. So he cares a lot about this. He says he's, solved 8 wars, since the start of his second term, and he's close to a 9th. We've seen a ceasefire in Gaza. We've seen Ukraine go all over the shop. I mean, I wonder if there are betting markets on it, because they would have changed a lot throughout the year. Because as Jared mentioned, his messaging has changed so much on that. Where we are right now, nothing's been landed with Ukraine. I don't get a strong sense of confidence that that's going to be resolved sometime soon, but we'll see. But I guess I want to ask everyone on the panel, and I'll start with you, Kat, and work my way down again. But what grade would you give President Trump on his peacemaking efforts this year?
Give him a pass, maybe.
Okay.
I think really you need to substitute the word peace with deal. A
Mm.
lot of deals, right? He's made a lot of deals between people. He's brokered deals between people. I don't think that a lot of those deals are going to result, as they are now, into any sort of lasting peace. We've already seen Israel is still continuing offensive practices within Gaza, within the West Bank. They're bombing Lebanon almost daily. So I wouldn't classify that as peace happening. Perhaps Gaza is getting less of that, but that's still happening. If you look at what's happening in other hotspots around the world, yes, he has been successful in getting ceasefire, successful into getting agreements, but I think those agreements are all in quite shaky hands. So I think in terms of peace, has he done any deal that's going to affect lasting peace in any region? No, absolutely not. But he has brokered a lot of deals. And those deals he's been able to broker because he's using sort of the force of the American military or economy or the reputation of America in order to back that up and sort of say, you did this or I'm going to do this. And he wants the appearance of making peace. I think he is less concerned about whether that peace is actually happening. So he'll make any deal, end any war, as long as he can say he ends it. But there's no teeth behind that to guarantee the backing up of that being a lasting peace. So I think really, for me, you have to substitute. Trump has been really great at making deals. The one lasting nature of those deals or the impacts of those are yet to be seen. I think what happens between Russia and Ukraine will be very interesting if he's ever even able to broker something there.
I mean, one of my favorite quotes from the year was, I think Hillary Clinton said, if President Trump can, resolve the Ukraine war without any, territorial concessions, I'll nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize myself. And I was like, yeah, if he could do that, okay. But now from the deals we've seen more recently, clearly major territorial concessions are on the table. How about you, Chaz?
Look, obviously he solved 27 wars, I think, last count. So yeah, that's an A+. Now, look, I think that we should compare Trump to what would have been there without Trump. Let's forget all the India, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, all those. Let's forget all those ones. In terms of the main ones, look, Ukraine, Russia, I don't agree with what he's done, but so far, would we be any closer to peace without him? Probably not at this stage. There's been a lot of faffing around with Trump, but at the end of the day, the alternative strategy of cracking down and supporting Ukraine harder with tomahawks and all the rest of it, that wouldn't have ended the war at this point in time anyway. That was just going to bleed Russia for another 2 or 3 years. That was the hope. That was the positive side there. So that's no better off or worse off because Trump's there. Israel, he got himself some positive publicity, but I think at the end of the day, I don't think we're necessarily better or worse off because of him either. I think that's also, we'll see where that goes. That's not over. I'd say the one area where you go, okay, maybe Trump has actually made a difference here is Iran. And that's not through peacemaking. That's through the opposite. like Trump is possibly the only person in conjunction with Netanyahu who would call Iran's bluff. No Democrats were ever going to call Iran's bluff. And he did. And they got shown to be holding a 2 and a 3 of spades. And let's see where that goes. This is very early days.
He contributed to that in Trump 1.0 by leaving the JCPOA. So he fixed something or addressed something that was an issue. I
think that's an interesting question, but I'm just talking about just the second term here. That's fine. No, I mean, you get to a point where you go, how far back are we going to go? And with the Back to the Future timelines, they can get very complicated very quickly. But all I'm saying is that even with Iran, I think it's really early days. We could, in 12 months' time or 18 months' time, Iran might have rebuilt their program under another mountain. So why don't we wait and see? It's equally, in 24 months' time, we might look at the Iran regime having fallen and gone, well, but that might not have happened if Trump hadn't blown them up. So let's just wait and see. I think that's really early days. But I'd say apart from Iran, I don't see anything anywhere that's necessarily made any real difference. So that's I can't grade it.
Okay.
It's too early.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But he's not necessarily going backwards, not necessarily making progress.
Yeah, I think I think when you deal with almost intractable situations where they're messed up beforehand and messed up afterwards in a slightly different way, like I don't think that's necessarily progress or regression. It's just, God, how are we going to solve this? That's, I think, where we are there.
How about you, Jared? What grade would you give?
Yeah, I mean, it's still incomplete, because I swear that's not just a cop-out answer like usual when you ask for grading on these things. But no, if you Google image the term peace agreement, the first thing or one of the things you're going to see is Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shaking hands in the Rose Garden in the 90s, right? And that's sort of the model of our idea of what a peace agreement should be and what I think Donald Trump wants to have occur in many ways. But the question is, where did we land 10 years after that, 20 years after that? Did we lead to a lasting peace? And so you could say that maybe they deserve the Nobel Prizes then for shaking hands. But I think in many ways it's important to think about what are the ingredients to peace. And I think one thing that at least in the Middle East in particular, you have to look at is not just peace, but actually stability. And I think you could say that the question to focus on is, do we have the conditions that are more stable than they were before? And I think you could say a less powerful Iran is maybe more stable. You could say Hezbollah not being there is maybe, a less powerful Iran is maybe more stable in the region. Hezbollah not being there is maybe more stable in the region. But and Israel that has increasingly isolated itself from the Gulf is not great. I think that just grading on peace, like peace for what time frame, right? Peace for a photo op, he killed it, right? Even speaking of FIFA, FIFA Secretary General was in Egypt at the so-called peace conference. So he wins the photo op game, but in terms of lasting stability, it's way too early to tell. But you do have to say that compared to where we were a year ago, I think Israel in Gaza and Lebanon, there's more stability than there was a year ago. That's it. That's all you can really say with some confidence right now.
What to do with this? If you substitute any American president for Trump with the global situation, would we have any other difference in any of those situations right now? Like you said, without Trump, but any other American president, possibly there were more presidents who had. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
No, I was just, I think I said this, the strike in Iran, right? Again, what is the lasting impact of that? And exactly as you said, the Israelis call this approach mowing the grass, right? And that's how they approached going into Gaza, dealing with Hamas. You just want to mow the grass, but what does grass do? It grows back, right? So what is the lasting solution? And I think the Abraham Accords is one avenue, not the only. But yeah, in terms of lasting difference between what Trump did, we know that he's not going to put boots on the ground. We know that he really, even with Venezuela and everything going on there, he has no interest in putting boots on the ground. But beyond that, we don't know. And it's far too early to tell.
Yeah, well, speaking of photo ops, one of the notable things from this year really would be a lot of the kind of Oval Office meetings that we have these snapshots from throughout the year. Like that's something that sticks out in my mind as we've got these like snapshots. Like I always remember that, February meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office. And that was quite a meeting. I mean, President Zelensky was able to turn it around in future meetings, but that meeting went very, very poorly. And then you've got other, officials meeting with Trump. I mean, Prime Minister Albanese, when he finally met with President Trump, they just seemed to get along like a house on fire. They were, just chums and everything's great. Or, Trump had these great moments, with the Japanese Prime Minister, and they, were going and watching part of the World Series together, and they were late to their press conference because they wanted to watch part of that, and they just seemed, this close. And so you see this, or even recently, we had a great Oval Office meeting with President Trump and Zoran Mamdani, which was another curveball. I did not have that on my bingo card for this year. So I'm curious, what do you think makes the difference between a good Oval Office meeting and a bad Oval Office meeting? What contributes to that? Open to anyone.
I'll kick off very quickly. I think going back to structure versus agency, why did that meeting with Albanese go so well? What happened a week before that? China started threatening to cut off critical minerals from the US. All of a sudden, Australia's looking great, right? Like, let's not forget when Albanese was in the US in September. What was he doing in New York? He was voting to officially recognize the state of Palestine, and he was doing a bunch of green investment forum discussions. Like two things Trump couldn't hate more. But then all of a sudden in October, again, Xi Jinping, the gift that keeps on giving, forces in many ways the US to look at Australia in a different light, and it goes really well. And then Zelensky, why did we change within a few months of that meeting? What changed? The Europeans very quickly after that went to the Oval Office and really tried to force the Trump administration or compel the Trump administration to see it in a different light. And I think they were successful. All you can see though, it's a bit Sisyphean, right? And it never is done. I'm just a sidebar. I think there's one country in particular that handled the first Trump administration better than any other country in the world, and it was Japan. And there was someone who was congratulating a senior Chinese diplomat on having, dozens of summits with the Trump administration, saying, that's amazing. How did you pull off all these summits and to get their attention like that? And the Japanese diplomat was like, no, we did not have dozens of summits with the Trump administration. We had one summit dozens of times with the Trump administration. You shouldn't forget the importance of just reiterating yourself over and over and over again. But yeah, so I wanted to clarify those key points because there's a lot more going on, but I've been talking a lot, sorry.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on what makes a good versus a bad Oval Office meeting?
I think personality plays into it. Trump has respect for people who command respect. So I think for Zoran Mondani in particular, he's sort of like the hot new thing, right? He was really hot, and Trump wants to be cool in that way. And I think that he was impacted by that. But also I think that Mondani's personality really sort of found resonance with Trump's personality. And or it was, as a popular influencer say, just witchcraft. Like, so Mondani went in there and just like Trump was flirting with him. It was witchcraft. But I just think that Trump, as much as he cares about people respecting him, he also has a thing for people who have strong personalities. Doesn't like, I wouldn't say that would go for Albo, right? Albo, I think, benefited from, exactly as Jared said, the importance of critical memory minerals and the gift of Xi Jinping. But I think for others, people that would perhaps be or are diametrically opposed in terms of policy, if they have the personality that meshes well, they sort of have that ability to gather media in the same way he has the ability to gather media, he's more likely to give respect for that. And he also seems to have a respect for people who are willing to speak their mind to him, even if he doesn't agree with what they say. And you see that there's been some when he gets upset with Modi, then when he gets back in friendship with Modi. Same thing with Musk, get really upset with Musk, and then they're sort of like tentative friends again. So I think there's some personality that happens there.
I was just gonna say, I think that it's pretty simple. If you can do something for Trump, then he just wants a deliverable. If you give him a deliverable, he'll be happy. You have a wonderful, wonderful little meeting. But if you got nothing for him, and worse still, if you're asking for something from him, then yeah, get ready to batten down the hatches.
It's a deliverable that he got from Mamdani.
Affordability. Being one being associated with a young, charismatic leader, two, being associated with someone who is championing affordability.
Yeah, wrapping himself in the cool new thing. That's a deliverable.
Also, like, what structurally does the US get right now from being closer to South Africa, the other disastrous meeting, right? I mean, it's like the president of South Africa did really well in terms of bringing the right people, but still there's not a lot in South Africa's favor. It has moved increasingly closer to the non-aligned, like Iran axis in many ways. And why would Trump want to be close to them? They had nothing to give him.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously the most disastrous one was when Zelensky decided to ask for security guarantees. Like, don't ask for anything.
Yeah.
If you want Trump to be nice to you, that's it. It's not about you. It's about him.
And they went into that meeting with the expectation of a critical minerals deal, and that's what Trump was keen on, but it got derailed. So how do these leader to leader relationships, if a country's leader has a good or a bad relationship with Trump, how does that impact actual policy things like the AUKUS Pact? How would Albanese having a good meeting with Trump impact something like the AUKUS Pact?
No, I mean, I can jump in. I mean, I just said, I'm waiting for I was deferring to the experts, but I was just gonna say that I think I think a positive has no impact at all
Mm,
because a positive can be withdrawn next week,
Hmm.
and it often is. Well, like when events overtakes the situation, but a negative, now that's a problem because Trump believes very much in total war
hmm.
and to use anything at his disposal at all to get at you if you bother him. And so if Albo got himself into a position where he was in a Zelensky-like situation there and Trump wanted to punish him, he would ask Steve Miller or whoever is staying next to him, what do they want most? And Steve Miller would say AUKUS, and he'd say, great, let's get rid of it.
Hmm.
Like, and so I'd say you can only lose
Hmm.
if you're in a negative situation. But if you're in a positive situation, I don't think it gets you any extra favors other than the one that you are negotiating with him over to give him his deliverable,
Hmm.
I would say.
To give Trump the win. You have to give something that Trump can win on, whether it's, and it doesn't have to be, it can literally be negotiating something that was already negotiated. There was an early one, I think, I can't recall exactly what it was, but he negotiated something with Canada that had been agreed on and announced that I've negotiated this deal. I believe it was over drugs along the border. Yeah, something like that.
Hmm.
And then the Trump administration could announce, I've negotiated this. You'd give them a win to announce. It doesn't have to be, anything new. It could, if you can go into a meeting with him and you're able to frame something that can then be reported in a media release or in a tweet or a truth or by the White House that Trump did this and Trump gained this, he negotiated that hard deal, then you're good.
Yeah,
You're
actually,
golden.
that reminds me of an interesting thing I noticed this year because I was looking back through the executive orders. I think I was writing something for our newsletter on Trump's executive orders, and he wrote way more than any other president had signed in their first 100 days in office. As I went to the White House website, and if you scroll through and look at the executive orders, almost all of them in the second Trump administration start with President Donald J. Trump does X, Y, Z. President Donald J. Trump, blah, blah, blah. The name of everything starts with his name for everything that he's done. And so for him, he wants to claim credit for everything, and being able to put his name on something is absolutely huge. You should go and scroll through and you'll just see his name over and over and over. And then I went back and looked at other presidents and it wasn't the same. Occasionally you get that, but nowhere near like the 95% rate that you see with Trump. Oh, well, yeah, we're gonna have time for Q&A very soon.
Can I just quickly add something on AUKUS?
Yep.
I'm gonna overlook the fact that Shaz keeps calling Steve Miller. Steve Miller fans didn't send us it. Even his wife calls him Steven. I know that. So I think with AUKUS, what I would try to keep in mind is, again, that structure, right? If you look at AUKUS, it could not be more Trump friendly. What is AUKUS? AUKUS is Australia spending billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars to buy US kit, to expand the US defense industrial base, and to get closer to the US strategically in terms of pushing back against a revisionist China. Why would Trump be against that, right? Maybe it's a window dressing thing, and you need to call it Trumpus or something. If he ends up getting upset with Australia, it doesn't make sense. In many ways, my question is, why hasn't the Trump administration forced other countries to do what Australia is doing in terms of supporting in that way? And I think in many ways, Europe is sort of doing that in terms of paying for the kit that Ukraine is getting. But still, I think the structural reasons for that's all right. The structural reasons for the US to be interested in AUKUS are just too strong to let it just wither away. Why would Trump reject hundreds of billions of dollars? When has he ever? He famously, again, I hate that I know this, but there's a famous magazine, I think it's called Private Eye, that used to send these 1 to 2 cent checks out to a bunch of celebrities to see who would cash them. Donald Trump would always cash them.
I love that.
So I can't see him, if he's going to cash 1 to 2 cent checks, he's going to want to cash hundreds of billions of dollars from the Australians.
Look, I don't want to derail, but there is an answer to your question. Why would Trump turn his back on hundreds of billions of dollars? Because it wasn't negotiated by him.
Mm.
He would happily turn his back on hundreds of billions of dollars if it's credited to the Biden administration. Like you said, the answer then is Trumpus rather than AUKUS, and that might be what would happen. But if you're asking when would Trump turn his back on $100 billion, that's when.
We saw this
Yeah.
with NAFTA, right? Like NAFTA was basically just a Trans-Pacific Partnership, but for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Underwent a rebranding of USMCA, and all of a sudden it's done. So 95% of new NAFTA was negotiated by the Obama administration, but you're never going to call it that.
Yeah. All right. So last question before we open it up to audience Q&A, and I want to hear from everyone on the panel. I'll start with you, Kat, and we'll work our way down the line. But what do you think is one thing that has changed as a result of this year in U.S. politics that will never be the same again?
I think that the willingness to break with precedent. I think that is something we saw some of this in the first Trump administration where things were a bit different, but I think we've seen some real breaks in terms of lawmakers sort of being able to say, okay, well, we'll cede, some of our power to the executive branch in terms of tariffs. We'll see how that goes with the Supreme Court. We've seen the Supreme Court be really, really friendly to this expansion of executive power. So for me, it's sort of that break in some longstanding precedents, the importance of U.S. soft power, and really just the willingness to just cut that without much pushback from anyone in Congress, really, aside from Democrats, but that the Senate was willing to accept that, knowing how important U.S. soft power is. So just sort of some of that break, and I think that we'll see that continue in politics as it remains a highly partisan, a highly polarized partisan environment. I think that we're going to see that sort of break with precedent remain.
How about you, Taz?
Yeah, I'm from a similar kind of area to what Kat was just talking about. I feel like, forever is a long time. My first instinct would be to say, well, the refugee program ain't coming back in a hurry. But it will, it might come back eventually. Forever is a long time. But I think that one thing that's probably on the way that I think has been changed at least irreversibly for decades, I think, by this Trump administration, is they have sent us further down the spiral of partisanship to the point where I feel like until now that it was getting frayed around the edges, but the concept of the government being the government for all people was still kind of intact. But I'm feeling like we're getting to the point now where the government has opponents.
Yeah, that's the outworking of, I think.
Yeah, yeah, the media from the other side is no longer on the same side as the government as far as the Trump administration is concerned. I'm not sure that's going to go away. I think when the next Democrat administration starts, I think Fox is going to be the enemy. I think the attitude will be the same. I think the smartassery we see on Twitter between administration officials and opponents, I think will continue. I think that kind of dunking on your opponents will continue. The sense that those people are not the loyal opposition; they are actual enemies of progress. I think that sense is going to continue. It won't be exactly the same. They'll take a step back. There's not going to be a Trish McLachlan-like figure who's just awful. But I think if we've taken in this last year, if we've taken 12 steps down, I think we're only going 8 steps back or 7 steps back. And I think that's not coming back for a real long time. And I'm worried because I think America is already further down that road than it can afford to be. And it's just gone further. Yeah, you're right.
But I think that this is probably more prevalent at the elite level than at the mass level, right? So if we look at public opinion and we look at research done, I should call out to one of my advisors when I did my PhD, George Hawley's just written a really great book called The Moderate Majority, looking at sort of that actually most Republican voters aren't in this very, very right wing, but most are sort of around that center. But if we look at polling and around elite, so elected officials, the elites have both moved on both sides to extreme. Now, Republicans have moved more right than Democrats have moved left, but both have moved to the extreme. So I think we're going to see a lot of this, the elite polarization, especially within the media and within, because of our primary system that we have in the US and low voter participation within the primary system, we're going to see that extreme partisanship continue at the elite level, even if we're not seeing the same to the same extent at the mass level, although there is still polarization within the public.
Just to be clear, when I'm saying this, I'm not necessarily talking right and left. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but I mean, the most aggressive against the opposition Democrat is Gavin Newsom, who is the least left. Like he's no Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to go the moderate wing, and he's trying to do it by being as aggressive as he possibly can against Republicans. And I think that sense of aggression is what's not going away and is going to get worse.
Yeah. And I mean, the one thing I noticed when I was back in America in October was I'm from Minnesota originally. I was visiting family, and there is this spice company that I've, been to for years. You just go and you buy herbs and spices. No big deal. You just think it's a normal retail shop. But an interesting thing is, since the second Trump administration, they became really vocal in their politics. And I didn't realize, but they are a left-wing spice shop. And they started rebranding all their spices, woke, blah, blah, blah. And they have a January 6th spice gift box. And like all these, and all of their social media posts are, but they're in the very much the aggressive vein of like, they're going to speak out, passionately and use their platform as a company to speak out a lot about that. And I just was so taken aback that this spice company that I've been going to for decades now is like being a political voice in a really overt way. I found that quite surprising and different. How about you, Jared? What do you think has changed in a way that is irrevocably changed?
There's this concept in the thing that came out of the DC think tank world, from a think tank trying to show their impact. What does a think tank want more than anything else? Is show its impact. And this concept you probably heard about, you may not realize it's from a think tank trying to get some funding and show their impact. And it's called the Overton window. And it's this concept that sort of the bounds of what is appropriate or deemed normal, or within this Overton window, and how this think tank was saying, thanks to this guy named Overton, we expanded the window of the discussion, the sort of public discourse. And I think more than anything else, what I've seen from this second Trump term is that the Overton window on so many different topics has never been wider in my lifetime. Whether it be on the use of military force and where, including Venezuela, whether it be on what a president can do whilst in office, who a president can fire, what's responsible political rhetoric from a president, or how much tariffs are going to cause a trade war or not. I think regardless of what you think of President Trump's policies, you have to give him credit. He's good at one thing exceptionally well. And anyone who doesn't give him credit for this, I think, is lying to you. He's really good at breaking things. And that includes conventional wisdom. And I think he has broken conventional wisdom in so many ways that the Overton window on so many different areas has just never been wider. And it's been harder and harder to answer those questions about what comes next because of how wide the aperture is.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And now I want to get to some audience questions. I want to get to as many questions as possible. So yeah, please raise your hand. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions succinct so that we can try to hit as many as possible. I'll come to you, sir, so you can ask about Venezuela. Please use the microphone. She'll bring it to you.
A simple question. None of you mentioned Venezuela.
Yeah. So just what are their thoughts on the Trump administration's actions in Venezuela? Chaz, I know you are passionate about this.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I mean, yeah, my response to you is that it didn't come up in the questions we were asked, so we didn't answer it. But the thing I care most about, look, I don't think there's about to be the next Iraq in Venezuela. I don't think Trump is into land wars, and I think the worst case scenario is he launches a few more bombing runs a la Iran, and then gets out of there. So I'm not concerned about that. I mean, look, if it does happen, a proper war, I'm very concerned, but I think that's unlikely to be what happens. But my problem is not about a potential war in Venezuela. What I'm particularly passionate about that Mari was referring to there is I just can't get over the murder campaign. I cannot get over the fact that at least 83 people have been just wantonly murdered. And I say people, not drug dealers, because we know nothing about these people. And even if they were drug dealers, you still don't murder them. You arrest them.
The technical term was narco-terrorist.
Sorry, narco-terrorist, which is a term that doesn't make any sense anyway. I can't get past it, not because I'm some naive idealist, but because I don't understand what this policy is even in aid of. We know from the Trump administration that these people aren't smuggling fentanyl. They've been accused of smuggling fentanyl and murdering tens of thousands of Americans. But number one, the fentanyl problem is history anyway. It's on its way down. Like there is literally less than half the fentanyl victims this year than last year, and it's continuing to be on its way down. Secondly, none of that fentanyl comes from Venezuela. Thirdly, none of the drugs even come from Venezuela. The Venezuelan drugs go to Europe. It's just insane they've got an aircraft carrier there. If they want to stop them, they can stop them. It just blows my mind, especially given when you look at the justifications, and this is the bit I really can't get over. When you look at the justifications, depending on who you speak to and on what day, they will give you contradictory justifications, all of which are patent bullshit. And you just go, well, the rule of law doesn't apply anymore here. And that is the thing I can't get past. Like, say what you will about the drones program under Obama, and I was not a fan of it, I got to say. I talked about that a lot on Planet America. It at least had rules. There are no rules here at all. So that, like, when we're talking about, look, if I was feeling really cynical when you asked about things that were broken that aren't coming back, I would, if I was feeling really dark, I'd say, well, now it's open season on anyone on earth for any reason whatsoever. But I am still naive enough to think that the next president will not just go around just murdering people wantonly for whatever reason. But yeah, no, I don't like this policy at all. It's got to be said. It's got to be said.
The one thing that this is one of several things that are happening that are showing the cracks of control that Trump has over the Republican Party. This is an issue which Republicans are starting to speak out about and are really willing to pressure him. We're seeing other things that are causing these fissures, especially between Trump and the base. Most of them revolve around the economy and immigration. 75% of Americans do not support the deployment of National Guard and for immigration purposes. Sort of these immigration raids that are taking are deeply unpopular. So these are some things that are causing the cracks in the base. But another one of this that's causing the crack between him and the Republican Party is this. So you are seeing him start to sort of act out of step with the people who have given him the support and cover for his more erratic break things actions. So it will be interesting is not the right word because I don't want to use interesting to describe what's happening, but to see what is do the Republicans remain committed to holding him accountable for these actions or not? I mean, history will tell us not, but maybe there's something different here.
Can I just add, I think one thing, even if there's a few things to pay attention to here. One is, why are so many people from the Obama and the George W. Bush administration coming out against these attacks in the Caribbean? And it's not because they hate Trump, even though a lot of them do. I think there's a few things going on. firstly, with Pakistan, with the drone strikes in Pakistan, that was one, you had the AUMF
Yeah.
right there, right? So Congress still had legislation that allowed the US in the global war on terror to do such actions. Secondly, what they did in Pakistan, what they realized is that the neoconservatives from the Bush administration will tell you as much, is that the Obama administration did not want to do enhanced interrogation like the George W. Bush administration did. And so they wanted to go in and strike guys. They did not want to have boots on the ground going to these remote parts of Pakistan to grab these guys from their homes or whatnot and to interrogate them. They just wanted to go in and out and lose less American lives. What you're seeing in the Caribbean, there's no military rationale for it. The Coast Guard does sort of policing at the sea in that area, especially in the Caribbean, and they can stop boats. They do stop boats all the time. But again, what does this all mean, though? In my view, the long-term concern is that future Americans, not necessarily American members of the military, future Americans who may be at sea holidaying can then be killed by another country and say, well, they could have been narco-terrorists. What if they did have a bunch of cocaine on them because they were going to celebrate on a cruise, right? This basically creates something that Chaz talks about a lot, a lawlessness that this results in, which is not conducive to long-term American interests, in my view.
All right. Yes, sir. I'll grab the gentleman at the front in the tan gray shirt.
Does anyone think that either we'll see a resignation or a retirement by Justice Alito or Clarence Thomas so that Trump can appoint his fourth and younger member of the Supreme Court?
It's an interesting one. Look, in 2024, there's a woman called Lauren Windsor who likes to go undercover. And she poses as a Republican. She turns up at Republican parties and she then takes them, and like she basically just sucks up to them and then exposes what they say to her. And she went undercover at a Supreme Court function, and she spoke to both Alito and his wife, and both of them very much insinuated that he was about to retire to her in 2024. Since then, I've seen no indication that he's actually sticking to that. But I mean, if you asked me last year, I said, yeah, Alito's definitely going because of that Lauren Windsor tape. But now I'm not so sure. I'm very sure that Clarence Thomas is not going in a hurry, because Clarence Thomas, I think a lot of people who don't follow the Supreme Court very closely think of the Supreme Court as just a bunch of Republicans and Democrats, but the gradations are greater than that. I mean, there are definitely 3 Democrats and then 6 Republicans, but amongst the 6 Republicans, there are gradations. And Clarence Thomas is not at all happy about what the other Republicans are doing. Not at all happy. He's fighting for what he sees as real conservative judicial reform, and he thinks Coney Barrett in particular and Roberts are fakes. And so he is still fighting the good fight as far as he's concerned, and he's not going anywhere until he absolutely has to. So I'd be really surprised if he went anytime until he's too sick to go on. I mean, I still think Alito is a real partisan, and I think he's probably the most partisan member of the court. Even though Clarence Thomas is the most conservative, I think Alito is the most Republican. And I think that for that reason, I do have faith in him to do the most Republican thing, which is to resign sometime in the next 3 years, because I'm sure that the Republicans will hold the Senate after the midterms. So yeah, that'll be my guess. My guess is one will retire and that'll be Alito, but not Thomas.
Yeah. All right. Another question. Yeah, I'll come to the lady in the patterned shirt.
My question is not very global. It's very domestic, US domestic. Trump's behaviour towards the people that he talks to, the women that he deals with, calling people piggy, calling people nasty. Surely, I mean, he can break things, he can do other things, but wouldn't the majority of Americans eventually start to think, how can this person be a role model for our children? It's gobsmacking that he's increasingly ramping up the nasty language, and that's his word, nasty, the language that he uses. And I can't see any other country in the world where people would see a leader speaking to his colleagues or the people around him like that and get away with it. I find that almost more gobsmacking than some of the other things that he's breaking.
Yeah, I might ask the Americans.
There wasn't a question in there. It was more a statement, I suppose.
Yeah.
But do you think that would have an impact on the American people more than some of the other things perhaps might?
You guys know more than I.
Say as a American woman that you would hope so. But I mean, I was teaching in 2015 during the 2016 election cycle when the Access Hollywood tape came out. I was teaching at the University of Alabama, which, contrary to sort of the woke narrative, has never been a woke campus. It was already always leaned towards conservative. And in that class, after I said that, I said, you know, when Trump said, grab them by their pussy, and the entire class was like, oh, I can't believe you just said that, because this is America, not Australia, where people care about, you know, language. Here, you can say whatever you want. But there, that was like shock, especially to, you know, a 60-70% conservative class to say that. And I was like, hey, look, if this is the guy you're going to support, you need to be comfortable with the language that he uses. And there's a stat that I would like to share that I think just illustrates why it hasn't been an issue. Obviously, you hear it. I hear it from my friends, even my dad, who was like a dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporter during the first administration, and who I had many arguments about, like, if you're going to vote with someone who talks about women that way, like, really? But there's a stat. So in the beginning of the 2015 primary season, there was polling of evangelical Christians, and more than 80% did not support Trump, did not see him as a candidate, did not say he is someone who could represent my values. By the time he was the Republican nominee, that had completely flipped. 80% of evangelical Christians saw Trump as someone who could support their values in the White House. And I tell you why. There is a narrative among this religious right, which is a very large voting population in the United States, that sees Donald Trump is a King David character from the Bible. So a flawed individual who can carry out God's plan. They see him, regardless of his language, regardless of the example he sets for their children, as a flawed individual who is carrying out the will of God for America as a Christian nation, which it was not founded as. But that is what they see. And that is a very strong and very, very, very reliable voting bloc for the Republican Party. So while you may have people who are concerned about the language, and you will hear them say, well, I don't like the way he talks, but I like what he's done. He's nominated 3 Supreme Court justices. He overturned Roe v. Wade. He's a pro-life president. So yeah, I think a lot of people are really concerned when he said quiet piggy to a reporter. And not only did he get away with it, but not a single reporter called that language out. Like, that is something that is, as a woman myself, as the mother to a daughter, I was like, that is disheartening to see. I don't want her at my age fighting the same fights that I've had to fight. And so that's really disheartening. But will he suffer any consequences for it? Absolutely not, in my opinion.
And in addition to the King David reference, a lot of the American evangelicals also compare him to King Cyrus, who was a pagan king. Mm-hmm. And so being able to see, like, and if you think of him as a pagan king who's anointed to do a specific purpose at a specific time, then people can justify a whole lot of behaviors as pagan behaviors, but be okay with that. One thing I've been surprised by is how, and I didn't notice this as much in the first Trump term, but now I'm seeing, conservative commentators, because we didn't even talk about DEI and the war on DEI that's happened, this year, but I've seen conservative commentators do a lot of trying to bring words back into the lexicon that were taboo and that were not considered okay. And they are actively saying, this word is now back on the table. We can say this, we can use this. So the language is important, but there's a desensitization that's going on. And there's also a lot of people who are willing to maybe, the kind of like plug your nose and vote for Trump, like accept behaviors they don't like because of the outcome that they want.
Look at the group chats that have been published about young Republicans, proudly saying I'm a Nazi. And And so there has been a shift in, and I think this goes to your point, Chaz, there's been a shift in what's acceptable in the narrative in the media environment.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I've got actually, I mean, look, these guys know more about America than I do. I've been there for an accumulated 4 weeks, but but my suspicion, and I would be interested in you guys' view on this. My suspicion is darker than you just said, which is that my suspicion is that because I get why people, when they're comparing to Democrats or whatever, go, well, you know, the Trump is going to help fight abortion and things like that. That's more important than naughty words. I get that. But there was a critical moment last year, at the beginning of last year in the primaries, and in fact in 2023 as well, when Ron DeSantis was around, who was going to fight just as hard as Trump on all the cultural issues that conservatives cared about, probably harder, and probably more consistently as well. And you know, there was a time when he had the wind at his back, and then he lost the wind at his back. What happened? Why? Where did the wind go? Why would they, when they have the option of supporting someone who's more conservative than Trump, who's more culturally right-wing than Trump, where did that support go? And I'll tell you where it went. It went with his indictments. That's where it went. When Trump got indicted, and when there were 4 charges against Trump, all of a sudden he became way more popular. Why? Why did he become way more popular than Ron DeSantis all of a sudden? This is what I think. It's just a suspicion. I have no evidence. I think it's because a lot of people in America are driven by hatred. I think that's why, and driven by vengeance. And they wanted revenge for Trump getting charged. At that moment that Trump got charged, they're like, right, we're going to get these guys. If they want to stop Trump, then I'm going to support him twice as hard. I think that is the mindset. And that's a really, really negative mindset. And that is what I'm concerned about. I don't know if you guys think that's true.
Rachel Weithofer in her negative partisanship model, which correctly predicted 2016 and 2020, would agree with you. She's into the media world now. She's not doing as much political science, but there is a motivator, and political scientists study this for the negative partisanship, where people can be more motivated by hate than by support of a candidate.
Yeah. And so it doesn't matter what he says. If he's the one who's going to deliver the FU message that you want delivered, then he's the one you'll support.
And that's a very, you know, as you said, a motivator, like because getting people out to the polls is so important in America. Having something an emotion that drives action and activity, almost that fight or flight response, gives you adrenaline and makes you do things. All right, we've got time for one more question before we have a reception. I'll come to this lady here.
Speaking of kings, I'm just wondering about the No Kings movement and what you think its impact might be. Is it something which might be stopping Trump? Is it something that might be giving pause for thought for Republicans who aren't quite sure which way to do it? Or is it something that's giving the American public the opportunity to see that there are other people that think the same way as them and that are being affected the same way, and that they can build their community despite having Trump in the White House?
Who wants to take it?
I'll start. I don't see why it can't be all of those things to a certain extent. I think in a tangible way, so let's think about movements and what type of movements last, and then what type of movements flame out. I'm old enough to have been in New York City when we had the Occupy Wall Street movement. You know, they say that now and people smirk, right? Why didn't that last? In my view, it didn't last because it didn't actually have a positive agenda. It was just against something, right? And that's not like the civil rights movement, on the other hand, that lasted for many, many years. Why did it last? Because it had something that we were aiming for, if that makes sense, right? So No Kings, is that something that we're aiming for or just against, right? So I don't see that being a long-term motto for forever, especially because I don't think Trump is going to be president forever. But I think what it does do in a tangible sense is that it shows passion for and gives an outlet to Americans not fan of Trump. But in a more tangible sense, I think it helps with registration for voters, and it helps energize politicians to get involved and to act, right? We are going to see members of Congress who got basically activated by the No Kings movement. but in 10 years to 15 years from now, we're going to be almost smirking at the mention of no kings in the same way that we are smirking at the sort of the Occupy Wall Street or other anti-movements in the past. I imagine this will activate people, and I think this is a good channel for now. Good channel is it's an effective channel for now, but I don't see it being a long-term movement because it doesn't have that positive agenda that it's aiming for.
Any other thoughts?
I agree with that. I was just going to say that I think it will do what it's meant to do, which is motivate Democrats. I don't think it's going to convert a lot of Republicans, but I think that's all you need to do. Like the way American politics works, there's a lot of history that demonstrates this, is that in the midterms, the people who were demotivated in the last election become really motivated. And then they come out in force, and the people who were feeling pretty good in the last election get a bit smug, they stay home, and then they just get swept out. And this is going to motivate a lot of Democrats were at each other's throats back in March and April about, what are you doing? What's going on? Why aren't we seeing resistance? Well, the No Kings movement helps them feel happy that something's happening, where someone's doing something, and like Jared said, it'll get registrations, it'll get community activity happening, which is better than nothing. And that's what you need to get out the vote in the midterms. And that will be what it achieves. And Democrats may forget the No Kings movement even existed in 3 years or 4 years, but that it will have served its purpose, which is the Republicans getting pumped in the midterms. That's what it's there for.
Final thoughts, Kat?
Sure. So I think that and both of you touched on this, what's interesting about this question is it makes us think about what's the difference between a protest and a movement. And protests are people show up, they're there that one day and they take no further action. When it becomes, and I saw that I had some of my students in this class, and so we've done some reading about the No Kings protest. I taught US politics, race, power, and polarization this semester. So I imagine that you can imagine how interesting that class was with the everything that happened in this this time period. But why you may see success from this, whether or not we remember the No Kings, if we think about Occupy Wall Street, two things. One, what Jared and Chas are saying, that if it motivates people, you get people signing up, people involved in the political process. That's the difference between a protest and a movement. If it moves people into political participation. So if we see an outward working of political participation from this movement, then it's going to be a successful, whether or not the name stays the same, right? So if we see that, then it's going to be protest. The other thing that I would say in terms of the difference between protest and movement, and I lost my train of thought, unfortunately. But if we do see, as I was saying, you see that the political participation, but also, oh yes, the one thing that I noticed with the No Kings is that it cut across demographics in a way that some of the earlier anti-Trump protests have not cut across demographics. The Women's March really skewed very young, right? The Democrats have a problem. They are supported by youth, but the youth don't get out to vote. So whenever, they rely on the youth vote, they get screwed over. The only person who was able to do anything good with the youth was Obama's first campaign, and his first campaign only. His second campaign didn't do that with the youth. The No Kings protests have been remarkably diverse demographically, especially in terms of age. And so that tells me that there's something slightly different about the political participation that's being activated by the No Kings protests than we saw in the Women's March and Trump 1.0. So that to me is something just to keep an eye on. Not that I know that it's going to have any staying power now, but that diversity of demographics, especially among age, is something that is interesting.
If I can just add one quick thing as a new Australian, I do have to say how much I appreciate the compulsory voting because of, in addition to the AEC and an independent AEC, in addition to ranked choice voting, what I guess is called here preferential voting. What I love about compulsory voting is that it removes the need that you see in the US to just piss people off. You were mentioning on this before, but that motivation, that's what we were talking about, motivation. And you don't need to motivate people to go to the polls here in Australia. You have to, basically, you get fined if you don't, so I hear. But that is something that I'm really grateful for in Australia.
Great. Well, thank you. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. So now we hope you can stick around. We've got a bit of a networking reception afterwards. And if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, I encourage you to go to our website, www.ussc.edu.au, and you can check out the polling report. This recording of tonight will be available on our YouTube channel, and also check out our podcast with polling authors Sam and Ava that'll drop later tonight. Thank you so much.
Good.